Hello, and welcome to Session 2 of Building Bridges, Combating Racial Injustice. Today's topic is the problem with being colorblind. Our scripture for today is Luke chapter 10, verse 29, which reads, "And who is my neighbor?" This question is put to Jesus by a Jewish leader shortly after Jesus exhorts the people to love their neighbors as they love themselves. You would think it would be enough for Jesus to tell people to love their neighbors, but the first response people have is to try and figure out who they can exclude from the classification of neighbor. Of course, Jesus won't let them off the hook. He responds by telling the story of the Good Samaritan. Jews in those days hated Samaritans. So by telling the story, Jesus is teaching people that everyone is their neighbor. In How to Be an Antiracist, Ibram Kendi contends that people who pretend to be colorblind or who speak of living in a post-racial society are actually perpetuating racism by overlooking and ignoring it. Kendi claims there is no such thing as being colorblind or not racist. Instead, there are only racist actions and attitudes which work to maintain racial inequality and anti-racist actions and attitudes which work to combat racial injustice. So now, let's join our group again in their discussion about the dangers of overlooking racism.
Well, welcome back, panel, to our second discussion, and this revolves around the issue of really, is there anything such as being colorblind when it comes to race? And so I just want to throw that simple question out to you first, to ask, how do you feel if you ever hear someone say, "Oh, I don't see color when I look at people"?
I think they need a new pair of glasses. I think that when I hear someone say that, it's really devaluing the individual, because everyone has a story, everyone has an experience, and to say that I don't see color, it's sort of, this doesn't go away. My skin color doesn't go away. So it's a part of who I am. So if you say you don't see color, then you're taking away a part of my identity of who I am. So, yeah, I would challenge that and say, tell me a little bit more why you think about that.
I agree. I look at him and say, "Oh, you're lying." That's me, right up. Agree that they are devaluing you as an individual, and I've not had anybody that I know of recently say that, but I would be very suspicious of that comment.
It makes me think of a story. I was in my late 20s, and I was working at a Midwest college, and had gone into an office, and I was waiting to meet with a colleague, and the person I was speaking with, I had just said I was in Florida for a month, and they said, "You have a great tan," and I said, "Well, thanks, except this tan is natural." So, but it started a different conversation about, tell me why I didn't spend any time at the beach, so I didn't have much, but it was just an interesting conversation. So when I hear that issue of don't see skin color, it's always draws back to that story.
I think when I hear that, it makes me really angry, because when you are saying that you don't see skin color, you're just ignoring like patterns of things that happen in our society. And like if you take something like police brutality, for instance, if you're saying I don't see skin color, then you're taking all of the examples of police brutality that you see and are just thinking like, oh, they're just some bad cops, it happens to everybody, and then you think whatever you think about that. But when you pay attention to skin color and you're not colorblind, you realize that police brutality happens disproportionately to people of color, and that white people are less likely to be victims of police brutality. And that's just one example that I've seen and noticed of people who are being colorblind just completely missing the bigger picture.
When I first started to hear the term "I don't see skin color," I didn't think anything of it because I thought, I don't see skin color. That just means we're all we're all created equally. Like for example, you say I don't see skin color. Well, at the time, to me that was like, okay, well, uh, let's say there's a million flies in the room. I don't see those. I didn't. So I didn't do any. I didn't do. I didn't look into it very much until just recently in what has been defined as I don't see color. Just because at the beginning, for me anyway, when I first started hearing the term, I would think by saying I don't see skin color, that just means everyone's treated the same. Everyone is just as equal. There's nothing to react to, or there's nothing to judge or anything like that. That's obviously not its definition, but that's where I sort of started when just recently when police brutality started happening, or I started looking into some of the other racial injustices that had gone on over the years.
Well, and as we talk about the terms racist and anti-racist, in some way that very much that terminology fits into that, because I think when people say, well, I don't see color, they're trying to convince maybe the person they said that they're not racist, but they're also not anti-racist. They, just want to homogenize it all. So I'm just curious, as when you all hear those terms anti-racist versus being a racist, what, how would you define those? We know how they've been defined in the book we're reading, but what was your takeaway from that kind of terminology over really what we've been hearing, ever hearing? We're either racist or not racist, and he basically says there's no neutrality in that. And so I'm just curious, what are your all's thoughts on those two terms, anti-racist versus racist?
It wasn't clear to me because I still need to hear that gentleman talk about it again more than once. But one example resonated with me, that I am racist. I think that's what that says. I think, I don't know. Because I have said, well, I don't want to be around them, a them and a they, of them and a we. So in other words, I have some racist ideas about that group of people. So, but I'm still trying to figure out, am I anti-racist or am I racist, not racist? So I need to listen to that chapter again. But that resonated with me because I have said that. So I know I'm one or the other. Somebody will have to help me out with that. But
Yeah. Amy?
I mean, I'm not gonna lie. I had to look up what anti-racist meant,
I
but
know.
from what I gather, pretty much being an anti-racist from what I researched, pretty much just gave the definition of being a person, group, or a collaboration that have come together to develop actions, movements, or policies built to oppose racism, which that would to me give the definition of that to someone of like a philanthropist or someone who would or some one group to start almost like a movement of some sort, almost like the protests that have been going on, just to be able to bring almost not bring racism out, but bring racial injustice out, to be able to show and try to do something about it. Versus someone who is not racist, that just means they're just like us. We acknowledge color, but we don't treat others differently based on that.
So to me, it's the action, right? It's the recognizing, but then doing the action about that there are systemic issues. And what can I do? And when you look at policy, practice, things that the rules, that everything that sort of govern a society, but then you recognize and say, there are things here that need change. So to me, it's that action that goes with it. It says, not only do I acknowledge, but there's an action that is tied with it. That then you start to build as more people come along, that what I call that allyship that says all of us collectively can move towards breaking down systemic barrier, which is what I think we see now in the protests that are happening worldwide. You think about worldwide.
Yes, worldwide.
And addressing other systemic racist issues in other countries, but also in solidarity, but with the issues that we're experiencing in our country.
I definitely think being anti-racist, just echoing off what everybody else said, but it means to be actively fighting against racism. And I think when I say that, the first thing that would pop into my mind would be like, oh, you have to be out there fighting every day, going to every protest. And I don't think that's always what it looks like. I think that it also looks like reading more by authors who are people of color, listening more to people of color and their, and I'm speaking especially to white people, and things that I think as a white person, I know that I need to be better about doing, but listening more to people of color and to their experiences and how they think, we can continue to become more anti-racist and continue to fight racism, because I think that for a white person, just going off our own ideas and other white people's ideas isn't fully getting the picture, and that instead we need to be listening to people of color and letting them like lead the fight, and then in turn using our privilege to speak to other white people who might not listen to people of color because of their because of their own racism and things like that. But I think that we should really be turning to people of color to like lead the charge and also to learn from them.
Well, don't go to Home Federal because they wouldn't let me get $10 worth of quarters in Farragut. Just saying. Because I need to go to the laundromat. And so if you have friends who have money at Home Federal, tell them they didn't treat Leora right.
But I think what you're describing is that allyship I was talking about, because you don't necessarily need to be out and protesting publicly, but you reading, learning, conversations with people. I mean, those are the things that are equally as powerful as a protest. That I think that can, and I think that's truly the only way we're going to affect change, systemic change, is by broadening and having a allyship in this collective whole.
Well, and I think it's interesting, it comes up in the conversation of colorblindness, because really there's just been blindness, period, of things that we are aware that go on, but we just want to turn a blind eye to it and hope that someone fixes that, or it's not affecting me personally, so I can just let it go, and that in and of itself is racism. When you've recognized, and coming out of the field of education, you're well aware of the inequities in some school systems with people of color, and yet as long as it's not where you are or affecting your children, you turn a blind eye to it. And so, and that in and of itself is racism. An anti-racist is that ability to recognize that there is that issue, and how do we then go about to, like you said, team together to alleviate the problem. And perhaps part of the protest is just this rise up, a shouting voice of, we're here, stop ignoring us. It is that kind of protest, I think, is just, to awaken people. And now what do we do with the awakening, from that? But, if people, Carrie, you mentioned, talking with people and so forth, but there does seem to be, it was almost like there were unspoken conversations that people want to have, but they're afraid to have with people of color, that I will say something inappropriate. I'll hurt your feelings if I ask this particular question or that particular question. And what would your advice be to people, when you really want to know, and each of you have spoken to, I want to know about your lives, your heritage, is that an offensive question if I ask you, Frank, you just mentioned, I grew up a migrant farmer. May I ask you about that? Would you share that experience with me? But how we're hesitant, for we do not want, to make people, feel drawn out. What would you tell people in terms of having these conversations, these rich conversations so that they wouldn't worry about saying the wrong thing?
I think it starts with the level of genuineness, but authenticity. But it's a simple phrase. Glenna, I'm a little nervous to bring this up, but I'd like to talk to you about your experiences if you feel comfortable. I'm committed to learning. I'd like to know more. A simple sentence like that can open up a dialogue so that it doesn't, and then you're empowering me whether I choose to get engaged in that conversation. So that I now have I'm coming from a position of I can share what I'd like to share, but I also may be dealing with some other of my own issues that I might not be willing to share, or also recognizing that it is only one experience, not the experience of a collective whole.
I think too, going off what Frank said, is asking questions with that authenticity, but also knowing that you might not get an answer and that that's okay. And just being open to like respecting people's privacy and respecting what people may want to share and what they may not. And I think especially as a white person, just being aware that people of color have different experiences than us and might not feel comfortable sharing some certain things that they've experienced, whether that pain is too deep or whatever the reason may be. But then being okay with that and respecting like their space and respecting their privacy, but also just being honest and saying, you know, I am ignorant about this and I would like to learn more. Like, could you help me understand? And taking that posture of, I'm not even sure the right word, but that posture of just,
No.
okay, I'll phrase
Sorry.
it differently. But sorry. But anyways, just taking that posture of kind of being smaller and acknowledging that
Humility.
yes, humility. Okay, I'm gonna say it one more time. Taking that posture of humility, and knowing that, you know, you are the one that's wanting to learn, and so you're just willing to listen and not to invoke your own opinions on the conversation, but willing just to listen and learn.
And I agree with both of the things that you all have said, but I also think that what type of relationship is existing prior to the conversation? Because if it's a relationship that you value and you know that that person is sincere and genuine, then you're going to feel comfortable with telling them what you feel comfortable telling them. But, you know, if a total stranger comes up and, well, tell me about, oh, really? Okay. You know, it's going to be different. So I think the type of relationship that's at the beginning of that scenario of dialogue, I think makes a difference.
I think at the same time, though, that is very important. But for some people who might not have a lot of close friendships outside of people of their own race, sometimes that might come to talking to someone you don't know quite as well. And so that's where that posture of humility like becomes really important.
Okay, I can understand that.
I think the nail was hit right on the head.
Okay.
I'm right there with, you know, developing a relationship with said person to be more inquisitive, because I'm an open book. I will tell it all. But when it comes to like specific things like that, I want to say that I'm an open book, and I'm not afraid to talk about, you know, my background, my history, that sort of thing. But it does depend on the level of friendship or even companionship as to what I'll share, to an extent, because I will eventually. It's me.
Well, it sounds like it comes down to being able to trust the person who's asking the question, and maybe being able to rid yourself of some assumptions that you might bring to the conversation and that you have to set aside and really, you know, open yourselves up to be prepared to hear, but and not having a hidden agenda of, oh, I knew that's what they would say, and then, you know, so I think it is that trust and authenticity. Well, you all have been very genuine and authentic in this conversation, and so we will close this one out and we'll open the discussion up to our discussion groups.
It's now time once again to split into breakout groups, whether online or in person, to discuss some of the ideas our group talked about today for yourself. So today, here are some questions to get you started. 1, inequalities between light and dark African Americans can be as wide as inequalities between Black and white Americans. How have you seen colorism play out in real life or in the media? Question 2, The color of one's skin has set up a hierarchy of human value between different races, such that some immigrant groups are valued more than others. For example, European immigrants are seen as having higher value than those from Latin American countries. What have you witnessed or experienced that is evidence of this form of racism? And lastly, Ibram X. Kendi makes the case that to be anti-racist, one must stand against all forms of bigotry. Why is standing against bigotry essential to standing against racism? We hope you enjoy your discussion together.